There is a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working too hard, but from working in a way that feels fundamentally wrong. You wake up tired even after sleeping, the hours feel heavy before they even begin. You watch the clock not because you're lazy, but because every minute inside that structure feels like resistance. And eventually, a quiet realization forms. It's not that you don't want to work, it's that you cannot work like this. People who cannot function in a traditional 9-to-5 job are often misunderstood in the most damaging ways. They're labeled undisciplined, unrealistic, entitled, afraid of responsibility, incapable of real life. But the psychology of people who cannot work a 9-to-5 job has almost nothing to do with laziness or immaturity. In many cases, it has everything to do with how their nervous system, cognition, and identity interact with rigid structure. To understand this, you have to separate work itself from the format in which work is delivered. The 9-to-5 model is not neutral. It was built for a specific kind of mind, body, and social structure. It rewards consistency over fluctuation, obedience over autonomy, presence over output, and predictability over creativity. Some people thrive in this environment, others deteriorate. People who cannot work a 9-to-5 job often experience time very differently. Their energy does not follow a linear curve, it comes in waves. Bursts of intense focus followed by periods of low stimulation. When forced into a rigid daily schedule, they are asked to perform at times when their cognitive and emotional resources are depleted. This isn't preference, it's physiology. Many of these individuals are capable of extraordinary productivity, but only when allowed to work in alignment with their internal rhythms. In a 9-to-5 structure, those rhythms are ignored. You must be alert at 9, you must perform at 2, you must be present at 4, whether your mind is available or not. Over time, this creates internal conflict. Another critical psychological factor is autonomy. The traditional workday subtly removes choice. You don't choose when to work, how long to work, or often even how to work. For people whose sense of self is tightly linked to autonomy, this loss feels suffocating, not because they reject responsibility, but because they need agency to function. Autonomy is not a luxury for these individuals. It is regulation. When autonomy is removed, stress rises. Motivation collapses. Resistance builds not consciously, but neurologically. The body rebels before the mind can rationalize. Another important layer is meaning. Many people who cannot tolerate a 9-to-5 job are deeply meaning-oriented. They don't work well when tasks feel arbitrary, disconnected, or purely performative. Being present for 8 hours matters less to them than producing something real. When work becomes about time served rather than value created, they disengage. This disengagement is often misinterpreted as lack of work ethic. In reality, it's a refusal to invest life energy into systems that feel empty. These individuals often work obsessively on things they care about. The issue is not effort, it's alignment. Another psychological truth is that many people who struggle in 9-to-5 jobs have heightened sensitivity, sensory, emotional, or cognitive. Office environments are often overstimulating, fluorescent lights, background noise, constant interruptions, social performance. For sensitive nervous systems, this environment drains energy rapidly. By midday, they're not lazy. They're overloaded. Another layer is identity. The 9-to-5 model often requires role compression. You must fit into a predefined identity, employee, subordinate, function. For people with complex or evolving identities, this compression feels erasing. They feel smaller at work than they do in life. That shrinking creates quiet despair. Another overlooked aspect is that many people who cannot work a 9-to-5 job are highly self-directed. They are capable of structuring their own time, but struggle when structure is imposed externally. This is often mistaken for defiance. In reality, it's a mismatch between internal and external regulation. They regulate from the inside out. The system demands regulation from the outside in. Another important psychological dimension is energy recovery. In a 9-to-5 job, energy expenditure is constant. There are few true recovery periods. Lunch is short, breaks are shallow, even downtime is monitored. For people who require deep recovery to function well, this creates chronic depletion. Over time, chronic depletion becomes burnout, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet kind. Motivation fades, creativity dulls, emotional numbness sets in. Another truth is that people who cannot tolerate 9 to -5 work often experience anticipatory stress. Sunday nights feel heavy, mornings feel threatening. Not because of the work itself, but because of the loss of self that accompanies the schedule. They don't dread tasks, they dread captivity. Another psychological factor is that the 9-to-5 structure blurs life into obligation. Days feel identical, time becomes something to survive rather than inhabit. For people who are deeply aware of mortality, this is intolerable. They feel time slipping away in blocks of compliance. That awareness creates existential distress. Another layer is performance anxiety. Many people who struggle in traditional jobs are acutely aware of being watched, evaluated, measured. The constant sense of surveillance, even subtle, activates stress responses. They are not afraid of work, they are afraid of being reduced to metrics. This pressure drains cognitive resources. Another important truth is that people who cannot work a 9-to-5 job often thrive in nonlinear environments. Freelancing, creative work, project-based work, entrepreneurship, research, or any role where output matters more than hours. This tells us something crucial. The issue is not incapacity, it is incompatibility. If you recognize yourself in this, it's important to hear this clearly. Struggling with a 9 to -5 job does not mean you are broken. It means the system was not designed with your nervous system, cognition, or values in mind. Another deep psychological layer behind why some people cannot work a 9-to-5 job is how their nervous system responds to constraint over time. At first, many of these individuals try. They show up. They adapt. They tell themselves it's normal to feel tired, bored, or slightly empty. But what separates them from those who eventually adjust is that the discomfort doesn't fade. It accumulates. Each day inside a rigid schedule adds pressure. Not dramatic pressure, but quiet compression. The kind that doesn't explode, but slowly drains vitality. The body starts signaling first fatigue, headaches, shallow breathing, restlessness. Then the mind follows irritability, detachment, loss of motivation, a sense of meaninglessness that can't be explained by workload alone. This is not weakness, it is misalignment sustained too long. Another crucial psychological factor is how these individuals experience motivation. Many people are externally motivated. Structure, deadlines, supervision, and routine activate them. But people who struggle with 9-to-5 jobs are often internally motivated. They are driven by curiosity, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. When those drivers are absent, motivation collapses. External pressure does not energize them, it paralyzes them. This is why telling them to just be disciplined misses the point entirely. Discipline without intrinsic motivation feels like self-erasure. It may produce compliance, but at the cost of inner vitality. Another layer is the relationship with time ownership. A 9-to-5 job doesn't just require labor, it requires predictable availability. For people who experience time as personal territory, this feels like a loss of sovereignty. Even when the work is tolerable, the knowledge that their time is no longer theirs creates tension. They don't feel free during work hours, and they don't fully recover after them. This leads to a fragmented life, where rest is spent recovering rather than living. Another psychological truth is that many people who cannot tolerate 9-to-5 work are highly aware of opportunity cost. They feel viscerally what they are giving up in exchange for stability, creative energy, mental clarity, presence, Curiosity, the sense that life is unfolding rather than repeating. This awareness creates grief. Grief creates resistance. Another important factor is emotional authenticity. Traditional work environments often require emotional masking. You must appear engaged when you are depleted, calm when you are stressed, neutral when you disagree. For people who value emotional congruence, this constant masking is exhausting. They are not unwilling to be professional, they are unwilling to be false all day. Another layer is adaptability versus rigidity. Many people who struggle in 9-to-5 jobs are highly adaptable in dynamic environments. They respond well to change, novelty, and complexity. But rigid systems with fixed rules, schedules, and hierarchies suffocate that adaptability. Their strength becomes a liability in static structures. Another psychological dimension is guilt. Society glorifies the 9-to-5 as the marker of adulthood and responsibility. Those who cannot tolerate it often feel deep shame. They believe something is wrong with them. They compare themselves to others who seem to cope just fine. This guilt keeps them trapped longer than they should be. They don't leave because they're irresponsible. They stay because they're conscientious. Another overlooked aspect is how these individuals experience money. Many are willing to earn less in exchange for autonomy, flexibility, or meaning. This doesn't mean they don't value security. It means they value psychological health more. For them, money that costs their inner life feels too expensive. Another layer is creativity suppression. Even in non-creative roles, creativity is a human impulse. Problem-solving, curiosity, experimentation. When a job leaves no room for these, creative energy turns inward and stagnates. This stagnation often manifests as depression or numbness. Not because the person lacks gratitude, but because they lack expression. Another psychological truth is that people who cannot work 9-to-5 jobs often feel alive when they control their workflow. When they can choose when to engage deeply and when to rest. When work feels like an extension of thought rather than an interruption of life. This is why many of them work longer hours voluntarily when self-directed than they ever could under supervision. Freedom activates effort, constraint kills it. Another factor is the mismatch between modern knowledge work and industrial-era schedules. Many people who struggle with 9-to-5 jobs are doing cognitive or creative labor that does not obey clock-based productivity. Insight doesn't arrive on schedule. Focus fluctuates. Forcing output at fixed times degrades quality and morale. Their struggle is not personal, it is structural. Another layer is emotional regulation. Many people who cannot tolerate traditional schedules rely on flexibility to regulate mood and energy. They may need solitude after social interaction, movement after focus, or rest after emotional labor. Rigid schedules deny these adjustments. Over time, emotional regulation breaks down. Another psychological truth is that these individuals often experience a split identity. At work, they feel diminished. Outside of work, they feel more like themselves. That split becomes unbearable over time. Living half alive for most of the week creates existential distress. They don't want to escape work. They want to integrate life. Another factor is that people who cannot work 9-to-5 jobs often have a strong relationship with intuition. They feel when something is wrong long before they can explain it. The discomfort is somatic, gut level, and when ignored, it intensifies. Listening to that intuition is often framed as irresponsibility, but ignoring it leads to burnout. Another psychological truth is that leaving or rejecting the 9-to-5 path often triggers fear. Fear of instability, judgment, failure. These fears are real. But for many, the fear of staying becomes greater than the fear of leaving. That's the tipping point. Another important layer is that many people who cannot work traditional jobs are not anti-structure. They are anti-misaligned structure. When they build their own systems routines that match their energy, goals that reflect their values, they are often incredibly disciplined. The issue was never structure, it was imposed structure without consent. Another overlooked aspect is recovery of self-trust. Many people regain confidence once they step out of environments that constantly signal inadequacy. They realize they were never incapable, just mismatched. That realization is life-changing. Understanding the psychology of people who cannot work a 9-to-5 job reframes the narrative entirely. It shifts the story from failure to fit to clarity about fit. It recognizes that human nervous systems, motivations, and identities are diverse and that no single work model can serve everyone equally. You don't struggle because you lack discipline. You struggle because your system needs autonomy, meaning, and rhythm. You don't resist work, you resist confinement. You are not broken, you are misaligned, and once alignment begins, even imperfectly, energy returns. Motivation follows, life feels inhabitable again.